Afternoon, Captain Burrow-Westman.
Good afternoon,
cadets. Just so you know, this meeting is going to be recorded for posting on our YouTube and potentially our Instagram and other sources. So just so you're aware. All right, after you, Captain Jones.
Awesome. So I'll be really quick, even though all of my 300s know that's not necessarily true because I like to talk, right? So one, thank you, Cadet Vinant-Tang and Cadet Reyes and team for planning today's events, right? This is only one of many panels that we're expecting to have here at Det 055. So I'd also like to extend that thanks to our team of ladies who are here to share their perspectives and share their experiences. The women in leadership conversation, right? So we chose a specific topic because we wanted to start off with a small but mighty force within our Air and Space Force, right? When we look at the numbers of our Air Force, in active duty particularly, 20% of our Air Force are women, right? 22% are officers and only 20% are of the enlisted force. So that's not a large percentage of women within our armed forces. But that is perspective and that is understanding of how these women navigate the Air Force through their specific leadership roles, through their specific APCs, and through their specific personal lives, right? Leading families, being married, being single, etc. Because these are all perspectives that are important. Because at the end of the day, this is a people business, right? You're going to lead, you're going to supervise, you're going to be subordinate to women leaders and women airmen of our Air Force. So please feel free to ask questions. I know we have a couple questions that Cadet Reyes is going to lead us through. Feel free to ask questions, feel free to offer perspective, and feel free to just ask for transparency between our three speakers. And I'm excited for what you all are going to get today. So over to you, Cadet Vinant-Tang.
All right, I'll let Cadet Reyes take over and lead the panel. So after you.
Good morning, Captain Jones. Good morning, ladies, and good morning, cadets. I'm Cadet Reyes, and today we have a few women officers in our panel. I'll be starting off with introducing Captain Burrow-Westman. And then we have First Lieutenant Marvidis and Lieutenant Wuchner. Ladies, can you please go over your career and your AFSC?
Sure, I can start. So I'm Captain Burrow-Westman. I am currently coded as a 14 November intelligence officer. When I came out of ROTC, I actually was classed as a 6-1 Alpha, which has been renamed to 1-5 Alpha Ops Research Analyst. So I stayed active duty for 4 years and a week doing that. I worked at the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, and then I moved over to the Air Force Research Lab. After I left active duty, I joined Reserve Command, and that's when I cross-trained as an intelligence officer. So I've done a lot of traveling and worked with a lot of organizations. Currently, I'm with the 28th Intelligence Squadron down at Hurlburt Field in Florida.
Lieutenant Wuchner, would you like to go next?
Sure, I don't mind. Good afternoon. My name is Irene Wuchner. I'm 6-3 Alpha here at Edwards Air Force Base, which is another acquisitions billet. I do program management. So I've been in the military since December 2016. For about 10 years before that, I worked in the private sector in logistics transportation. So I was in aviation for almost a decade before the military. During that time, I had my bachelor's in business administration, and I did a master's in diplomacy with emphasis in international conflict management. So when I decided to join the military, the Air Force looked at all of my qualifications and thought I'd be great for software. So I've been at Kirtland Air Force Base for 3 years before transferring here. Kirtland was a lot of distributed mission operations, so they would deal with exercises for our sister services, integrating the fight and doing it in an electronic way so we can do it from our home stations. Here at Edwards, I get to be a part of something called the Joint Simulation Environment, and that is Joint Air Force and Navy, and we're at the risk of going what used to be known as FOUO. We're doing some more stuff with those computer-based systems. So, thank you.
And finally, Lieutenant Marvitis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, can you give me a quick comm check? Because I'm currently also at Edwards Air Force Base, and the service is slightly spotty in my office. So can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm Lieutenant Mavridis. I'm at Edwards Air Force Base. This is my first duty station. I'm an actual graduate of USAFA. I'm a mill to mill, so my husband is also stationed here at Edwards. He is a 6'2", and then I'm actually a force support officer, so I'm a 38F. Force support is a very, very broad career field, so I've had 3 different jobs in my 3 years here at Edwards. So I initially started being a club manager, which is really, really fun. So I ran pretty much food and beverage for our base. It was a great time. My second job, I was a section commander for security forces. So I was on G series orders as a lieutenant, as the right-hand woman to our commander. It was a great time. We have about 500 folks in that squadron that I took care of. And then right now I'm currently an executive officer to our general here on base.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a reminder to the cadets, we will have a Q&A session at the end. I would like to ask the ladies at this time that what are some of the unique challenges that are faced by the women in the Air Force from your personal experience or just overall from what you've seen?
So I'll take a stab at this first of all. A lot of the challenges that I see, like on my own day-to-day basis, it's kind of the same challenges that you see in the private sector as well. You know, you're balancing a career, you're balancing family. I have a stay-at-home spouse and a 7-year-old son. I'm balancing school. I'm balancing, you know, just being a holistic person in this environment. In some ways, the Air Force tries to make that better. In the private sector, when my son was born, I got 6 weeks of short-term disability with him before I had to go back to work. And with the Air Force, that's not the case. The private sector, they made it really difficult to be a nursing mother. They didn't want to give me the time and the space to be able to pump on the job like that, whereas the Air Force allows us to do that. The Air Force also provides us with sexual assault resources. I didn't have that in the private sector. And it provides me with the way to give back to the community through that sexual assault service as well. But at the same time, you see the same challenges as you'll see anywhere else. So probably the biggest thing for me is just PT. And you know, certain times of the year or the month, it's physically harder for me to do that. That's just the way my physiology works. So there's my 2 cents.
Those are both very excellent points, actually. And it kind of what you were saying is we've come a long way, but we still have such a long way to go. So some of the things, I'm actually in a squadron now. I'm really impressed that we're probably about 70% female in the squadron, which is not the case. And it is the first time that that has happened in my career. I made a joke yesterday after one of my tech sergeants said, hey, we should contact a male flight commander to see about this, that, and the other. And I said, we don't have a male flight commander. Our squadron commander, our DO, and all of our flight commanders are all female at the moment. And like, that wasn't planned, that just happened. But the cool thing about it is now I kind of have someone to talk to when it comes to stuff like the body armor doesn't fit because it wasn't designed for somebody with boobs. Or I'm going to leave work early today because I have a headache because my bun is just hurting my head, which, by the way, go ponytails, super excited. The fact that there's never any female uniforms in stock at the BX. And if there are, they aren't in my size. I've been wearing male uniforms or a mixed set literally my whole career because they're just, we're only 20%. So they're going to spend most of their time working toward goals for what most of the workforce is, which at the moment is still 80% male. So like those in the grand scheme of things, people are like, oh, okay, so you have to wear your men's combat boots instead of your women's combat boots. But I've been in for over 10 years and I've been wearing men's clothes for over 10 years, and it's not by choice. It's because that's all it is. It's always too big for me. It doesn't fit right. It's too tight in the like upper area, too loose in other areas. It's I mean, yeah, you get used to it, but it really wears on you after a while, especially if you're having to drag around all that gear in Iraq for 6 months and you can't even get body armor that fits you properly. So, yeah.
So I would say, I guess, in the short amount of time that I've been in the Air Force, it's really just choosing your battle buddies. So your options are typically men. So it sounds so silly, but the smallest things, like I got to plan a wedding, I just got married, and I turned to my counterpart, who's also a lieutenant, who's a dude who like could absolutely care less about the colors of my wedding. And now I've kind of transitioned into a different role where I work with all women, and it's awesome. It's really, really cool. There's a lot of things that we can talk about and that they just understand. But it's adjusting. It's going to be with anything. We're all going to have to adjust. It doesn't matter on your gender, your race, your background. We all kind of are going to adjust when we enter into active duty.
And talking about just being able to have somebody to talk to, like, let's talk about perception for a second. So yeah, you're sitting at work and you want to talk to your coworker about this really exciting thing. You're planning your wedding. You also, like, and I only bring this up because it's happened to me twice in my career, you also need to be careful about the perception of who you're talking to and who you're spending most of your time with. So yeah, we're only 20%, but people are still going to come after you for just being that female that's talking to somebody's husband. It literally, I'm sitting in Iraq. One of the guys that I worked with, he left his Facebook Messenger logged in at home, and like I wasn't sending him anything I shouldn't have, but his wife was upset because I was sending him messages at all. So like just having other females around you that you can talk to and have those experiences with and not have to worry about any perception or somebody trying to create or spread rumors, like that's kind of a big thing. So when you get a hold of the other women that are in the workforce, and keep in mind, there aren't that many of us. So when you get a hold of us, like I would like to see us to put special effort into looking out for and taking care of each other, because there are some people out there that are just going to be out to get you, but it's not going to be like that in the whole Air Force. So when you find each other, take care of each other is all I'm asking.
Yeah, that is a great point. I don't know if you ladies have had this either, but I always get treated like I'm a spouse. Like especially when I have to go take my son to urgent care, and the lady at that front desk looks me in the eye after she's holding my CAC in her hand, and she says, "Well, I need your husband's social security number." And I said, "Well, why do you need that?" And she says, "Well, he's in the military." And I looked at her, I said, "No, he's not." So they tried to bill that urgent care visit to my son, who was 5 years old at the time, because they didn't want to stop and think that, hey, maybe this person is not a spouse. So now that, like right now, we're in a family crisis. My husband's in the hospital, and we have such a small military footprint. There's only 15 military in my entire group. So we have a very small support base just like between us. So I'm the only female in my group. And that's a little scary going into that. So the group commander's wife is the one that reaches out to me, and we have these talks, which is still a little jarring. Like, wow, how do I call, like, you want to call her ma'am? My son adores her, and he's like, "I want to go see Barb." I'm like, "Okay, that's Mrs. Orson. All right, they're our friends, but we got to be careful." But it's that support base when you're the only female in this whole area, and you have to be careful who you talk to, like you said, ma'am. It's that support base makes all the difference.
Thank you, ladies. The next question is, what can officers of any gender do to create a more equal workspace?
I think that the first thing is recognizing that I am a rank over I am a female. And I say this because there have been times where someone will refer to a group of gentlemen as the lieutenants or the captains or the officers. And then when I walk by, I'm referred to as the young lady. I turn around and I'm like, it's captain. Like, I try to be as professional and nice as possible, but there's no reason why you should be stripping my rank from me just because I don't possess the same hardware that other people do. But the great thing is, and my husband's on board with it, is making sure that he corrects people in that, no, she went through just as much as you did to earn her rank, making sure that that's kept in the forefront of everybody's minds. And I made a joke the other day to my new flight chief, and to be fair, I kind of yelled at him from across the office behind a cubicle wall, so he couldn't see who it was that was yelling. But I said, hey, do you have a second? And he's like, it depends. And I'm like, well, the answer is yes, ma'am. And that's when he kind of straightened up a little bit. And he's like, oh yeah, that's my boss talking. So like, it was a joke, and I delivered it in a way that he would be able to receive it. But he's also now able to set that standard for the rest of the people in this new office that, yeah, I'm the ranking person back here and I am in charge. That's my positional authority, and I should be respected because of my rank and my position.
I mean, that's a great point. It comes down to professionalism, doesn't it? If we can maintain that sense of professionalism, and when you start at a new unit, at a new squadron group, what have you, you set the expectation, hey, I'm here to get stuff done. But after you grow, then you cultivate it a little bit and you're showing more of your human side, there's still that expectation of, look, this is still an officer in our midst. That isn't just Miss. It's not just, necessarily first name. I do that in my office because everybody else is either civilian or contractor, and they all call each other by their first names, and it starts becoming a barrier sometimes. But, it's a sort of different career field, so you have to navigate it, and you have to be prepared for the consequences if you don't do that properly.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. So to create a more equal workspace, so it really starts from the foundation. And when you enter into a new place, this is absolutely my ideology, but I want to understand, I want to know who my airmen are. I want to know their background. I want to know what challenges that they've come across to get to where they are, because we all have that. We all went through different schooling. We all went through a different household. So it's really understanding your airmen, your civilians, your contractor counterparts, really who are these people that you get to work with every single day? And then what type of relationship can you build? How can you challenge these people? And that to treat someone equally, you almost have to understand what makes one person tick versus the other. So you absolutely have to do that groundwork of figuring out who these people are. And for me, I am a pretty authentic person. So if someone's going to come to me with issues, more than likely I can relate in some way. And I'm going to give them a little bit of piece of me. And I'm a human too. I go through plenty of issues. I go through plenty of things daily that can kind of break down that barrier to where they understand that they can also come to me. So whether, again, it's not a religious thing. It shouldn't be a gender. It shouldn't be a race. Creating an equal workspace is definitely understanding the people you're working with is first and foremost. It's going to take weeks, months, potentially a year to break down some of those walls to understand who the people around you and who you're working with. So that's my perspective.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interject, but could you give some more examples of things that you liked in a workplace, whether as a subordinate or as a supervisor, starting with Captain Burrow-Westman?
So my biggest thing is communication, setting expectations, but then opening that line of communication. So when I get a hold of a new flight or a new team or new group that I'm working with, the first thing I do is, like, everyone tells you, observe what's going on before you try to make any sweeping changes. But I still lay down my expectations that, like, if the commander is going to ask me a question, I would like to have an answer. I don't care what that answer is. I would like to know what's going on. So as was just mentioned, breaking down those barriers to get to know your people, that's actually helped me more than anything in the long run. So I explain to anyone that I work with, anyone on my team, I don't care what the reasoning is. If you keep me in the loop, keep me out of hot water, I will do what I can for you. So keeping those lines of communication open. And I always try to make a point of finding out what the best way to communicate with each person is. So you're probably getting a lot of those communication and feedback lessons in your ROTC classes. Take note of that. So I've got, in one of my flights, I have a bunch of 3 deltas that work for me, 3DOs. So they're all of my computer server networking guys. They're a little introverted, but if I give them keyboards, they will chatter all day. So we literally have a group chat on Facebook, and that's where I've been able to get most of the information that I need. Plus, like, following through, if I say I'm going to do something, actually doing it. So I keep my day planner with me because I'm a nerd like that. But if I tell someone I'm going to do something, at that point, I make a note to write down on whatever day I'm going to handle it. I write down what it is, and then I follow through on that. And a lot of the feedback that I've gotten back from my team is that stuff like that resonates. So they're communicating with me what their needs and their feedback are. I communicate back with them on what's going on, like, to the best of my ability. I'm still just a captain, so my view is not from as high up as I think they would like it to be sometimes. But as long as we can keep all of that communication line open, and I know what's going on and I can take care of my people better, that's what I've found that improves the morale of a whole unit the best.
Thank you very much for that answer. Lieutenant Wilkner had to go to take a call, so if you could answer now, Lieutenant Mavroudis, that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I've had 3 different supervisors thus far. Currently right now, like I said, so I work for Brigadier General Heiger. He's an awesome supervisor. So I took this job as a 2nd lieutenant. So I walked in here with a butter bar. He selected me to be his executive officer. That is a big role. And so I was a super nervous lieutenant trying to serve a 1-star. So how do I do that? And it really came, so like understanding who this guy was, what he needed, what he expected out of me, that communication is absolutely key. So it starts with that. So what I appreciated for him being my supervisor was he understood my position very well, and he knew the things that I was bringing to him were important, and my job is to take care of him. So we have a really, really good line of communication. If I need to interrupt him in a meeting, it's for a reason. And so he very much respects, granted, it's taken a couple months to get to this position of hard work, dedication, and really bouncing ideas off of each other and taking the time to understand what's important to him and what's important to me. So that open communication, it does take time. And what I would say, what I look for in a subordinate, man, the willingness to learn. And I would say it's the same thing for a supervisor. It's the willingness to open up your ears, and you're just going to have different perspectives. In this case, General Heiger has never had a female executive officer, never. And so there are some issues that he probably has never thought about until I sit right outside of his office. And there are things that he probably he doesn't know. He's a guy. And there are things that I'll bring to his attention that now it makes him kind of second guess. There's a reason why I'm on this team. It's for my diversity, whether that be my career field, whether that's my gender, my religious beliefs, that's diversity I bring to our team. And he sees it like that. So same thing with my subordinates, being really willing to learn, listen. Constructive criticism is the best. And I want them to feel comfortable to bring it to me as well. So I want them to have the confidence in their job to tell me, like, hey, LT, that's not the way we do things. This is the way we do things. Because I want to learn from my airmen. They are the technical, like, SMEs. They understand their jobs so well, and they want to show off. They want to show off to their lieutenant how much they know. And I want to be able to encourage that. I want them to teach me. And similar, kind of going off what the captain said, I read this in a book. It is not what you preach. It is what you tolerate. I am the biggest stickler on time. And this comes from my background. My family always ran late. Oh, it drove me nuts. So when people show up late to my office, that is a huge, huge point for me to nail it, like nip it in the bud, that like no one is late to work, period, end of story. If you're late to work, you're going to explain why, and we're going to fix it for the next time. But those are little things. So it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate, because there are definitely things that I preach 100%. That I don't necessarily follow through with. That, you know what, I may be a little bit more lenient on some things, but man, if you are late to my office, that is one thing I'm a stickler about. So that quote is from Extreme Ownership. If you guys are interested in like leadership development books, that book is amazing.
Lieutenant Mavridis, if you don't mind me asking, what would be one of the examples that your supervisor didn't quite understand that you had to bring to his attention as a female?
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, so I'll do the same thing that I did with him, with you all. How many people know who George Floyd is? Like raise hands or, yeah, okay. How many people know who Vanessa Guillen is? Okay, I've got LT knows. Anyone else know? Okay, we got a couple thumbs up. So, not to totally out some of my commanders, but some of them didn't know who that individual was. And that made me so upset. Because to me, what happened to that individual and trying to take like personal out of it was unacceptable from a like command and control standpoint. And so for my boss not to know that situation, but was very well aware of other situations, really hit home for me personally that like these are things that matter. And it matters to your whole women workforce. So that was one thing I brought up to him. And he was not the only person that I brought it up to, because it's kind of my little like test that I was doing to see if people were keeping up with some of the times. So that was one specific thing that really got, like, we ended up sitting down, having a conversation, and I explained why it means something. So that was just, that's a small one, but that's a great question.
Thank you, ma'am. Lieutenant Wechner?
So, sorry, I'm getting another phone call. We bring up, you know, the point's been made about communication and diversity a little bit. And I completely agree with what the other ladies have said. I also take it a step further in being proactive in kind of different ways. So for example, Kirtland offered a mental health first aid class. They would offer like resiliency training in not just Air Force resiliency, but they would make other classes available. So like a lot of intersectionality study type of things. So if you can invest just a little bit of your time, you know, the expectation is there for us to be leaders. You know, you take those leadership courses, you read books. You should be doing the same thing when it comes to human resources. And I don't mean from the private sector human resource, but for example, I took my own leave and I took an all-day class on, I just blanked on the name of the class, I apologize. Essentially, it was a framework for addressing sexual assault by addressing all of these root causes. For example, you cannot solve problems like sexual assault when domestic violence is happening at home. You can't fix things like illiteracy when there's children starving at night or on the weekends because they don't get a meal when they go home after the school day's over. Not all of your airmen obviously will be affected by these issues, but a surprising amount of them may have come up with these things face to face. There was one sexual assault case that I was that person's advocate where they had issues that stem from childhood, and it manifested in some ways that we wouldn't expect, like being late to work. Well, she couldn't sleep at night because she was being harassed by somebody who did something in her childhood, and she's 26. So when it gets to that level and the commander's already aware, it's a big deal. And you need to be able to empathize a little bit on that level. You're still expected to do what's right for the Air Force and for your unit, but a little bit of empathy is going to go a long way as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Captain Burrow-Westman, would you like to add anything?
No, I feel like the other two officers hit the nail on the head with that one.
Okay. Thank you, ladies. Next question is, what do you look for in either a supervisor or a subordinate? Starting with Captain Westman, please.
Burl Westman. Captain Westman is my husband, and he's promoted, so I think you owe him something now. I think I look for what I can pull out of them. So what somebody's motivation is, whether that motivation is like recognizing them with different awards. Like within each of my flights, we've got an award that it's kind of in jest, like it's not an official thing, but whenever someone basically does anything that is awesome and makes me look good, I literally want to recognize them for that. And they are presented with a token of my appreciation that says, you did something awesome that made me look good. That's very motivating for some people. For others, they prefer like a time off award. Maybe they don't want to have to go to a mandatory fun thing that the squadron is hosting because it's not actually fun for them. So I give them an out to get out of that. But yeah, within people that I work with and work for, I try to look for what that motivation is, like what really speaks to them and is going to encourage them to show up and work with me so we can be an effective team. Is that the direction you were kind of expecting to go?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. I used up my communication answer on the last one, so I didn't want to say it again.
Lieutenant Wagner, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. I'm going to fall back on communication. But it's not just communication, is it? It's being able to relate to somebody. I used to have a trick years ago because I would deal with some awful personalities. And I kind of carry that with me as I find one good thing that I like about somebody. And it can be something as simple as, wow, I like the socks they're wearing today. And so it's not necessarily just that common ground, because you're going to have people that don't want to share their private lives with you. And you have to be okay with that. But as long as I can go to talk to somebody, being my real self or being an officer, if you will, as long as I can talk to someone and we can reach an understanding of how to move forward, I mean, that's what it's all about, isn't it? So I'm sorry if that's not too helpful.
No, thank you, ma'am. It was very helpful. Lieutenant Marvidas, or Captain, did you have anything to add? Lieutenant Marvidas, go ahead, please.
Sure. So I have only had airmen in one of my 3 positions. So I found it very, very helpful. One, you got to understand who you are. I am a very emotional, like sensitive, fluffy person. So in my office, we took the 5 love languages quiz. So that's the way I could better understand my airmen. And this naturally, it's not all tendencies, but women tend to be more nurturing, and that's how empathy comes a little bit more naturally to us. And so this is the way that I found best to relate to my guys. And yes, they were all men. And we sat down and we took the 5 love languages quiz. They thought it was the funniest thing, but it really helped me understand when I spoke to one person, it really resonated differently than when I gave someone else time off. Some people liked praise. Some people needed constructive criticism. Other people, if you gave them, depending on the type of criticism, they would shut down. And you really have to take that time to understand how these, like, you're spending so much time with these people, your subordinates, your superiors, you spend so much time with them. You really need to take the time to understand what makes them click, what motivates them, what pisses them off, what just pretty much everything. And it's really hard because I believe LT, I don't know if the LT or captain said this, but some people are just not going to be super responsive, and they're going to show up to work and they're going to leave, and they might not want much more to do than that. And that is totally fine. That is up to them. But to be a well-oiled machine, sorry, it's my service. Can y'all hear me? Awesome. Anyway, you've got to take the time to understand who you're working with is really the bottom line. So communication, empathy, all those things, and everything that you're learning right now. It's hardest peer-to-peer. So right now, where y'all are at, that is going to be the hardest time, because when you show up as a lieutenant, your airmen are going to listen to you because you're the officer, you're the lieutenant. But right now is where you're going to have the hardest time, is leading your peers. So take on that challenge, because it's going to get a little bit easier because you're going to have that positional authority, but you're really going to know that you have done something right when you've got airmen reaching back out to you after you leave, or they want to stay in touch. And when you need to make that effort too, it's a two-way street, because the Air Force is really, really small. You just don't know who you're going to end up seeing again.
Thank you, ma'am.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for all your great answers. Now, since some of you might have to leave closer to 3, we're going to open it up for just a general Q&A. So any cadets that have questions can go ahead and ask them, especially if you wanted them to elaborate on any of the previous answers, anything like that. So yes, it's open now for Q&A. Go ahead and just ask your questions.
Hello, I'm Cadet Cassini. I am a third-year cadet in the detachment. First off, I want to thank all of you amazing, wonderful officers for coming here to talk to us. I've learned a lot already, and better yet, I've learned how to articulate things I might see in the future as an officer. But one thing I wanted to ask is, Captain Jones mentioned the numbers earlier about how there's only 20% in the officer corps that are women, but that percentage does drop as we go through the ranks, and I've always wrote it off as naturally you have less airmen continuing through the ranks, leaving the Air Force. But I would like to open it up to see if you as officers have seen any obstacles or extra reasons that that percentage of women does drop as they rise through the ranks. Sorry if that was long-winded.
What I've seen firsthand is a lot of times women, you get to this certain point, a lot of these people have gone in at 18, now they're starting families in the meantime. It can be difficult for women versus men when you want to have a family at this point. I've always been a working mom. My husband's always been a stay-at-home dad, and it's a dynamic that works for us. But if I had a private sector offer that would allow me to be at home, all the time, it would be hard to turn that down. I love being at home with my son. I love doing those things. But everybody's different, but I see that being one of the major things.
That is primarily going to be a major thing other than just your standard attrition. And I'm excited for the other lieutenant to chime in on this because she's also mill-to-mill. But oftentimes it's just having a mill-to-mill marriage and you trying to start a family, it's going to be really hard to keep all of that going. And AFPC does what they can. I've seen where some aviators have given up on what their dream aircraft to fly would be just because flying this other aircraft would work better for their career, so they could stay with their husbands, so they could be stationed together, so they could live together with their kids. So there's a lot going on, and the Air Force is not quite fully equipped to handle all of that. Like, my husband works at Edwards Air Force Base right now. That's in California. I'm sitting in Florida. I haven't lived with my husband since October because the military just couldn't work that out quite yet. Thankfully, he's going to join here soon, but that wasn't without the intervention of a few generals. So just looking out for us at the end of my husband's career. So that's, if it wasn't for the fact that my reserve position is flexible and I knew that my husband was following, I would have never had the opportunity to take this position. And I did leave active duty just to make it easier to follow him around. I don't regret that decision, but the whole family thing did weigh heavily on that.
And I know I'm a male, but I would love to chime in on that. So like the captain said, right, like being part of the 14N community, our community is more women than male, right? Like we just have a lot of women. So these conversations come up a little bit more than certain other communities just because we're more faced with them. But like the lady said, right, when you think about starting a family and whose career is going to take precedence, right? You have to make those decisions. Am I going to get out? Am I going to stay in active duty? Does my dynamic, like Lieutenant Wapner said, right? Like, we still raise an eyebrow when we think about husbands being the stay-at-home spouse, right? People are still looking at that like, huh, that's weird. Why is that still a conversation that we're having, right? When we think about some of the advancements we're slowly but surely making, right? Finally getting maternity flight suits. We've had women flying for forever. Like, these are issues, right? And thankfully, we're living in a time where these things are coming about, but it's still, right? Me as a male, I can only imagine if I was a female, how frustrating this is that this is taking this long, right? We're having general flyers that are female that have never experienced this at any point in their career. And we're finally to a point where we're saying, hey, this is something we should look forward to, right? When it came up to that thing about ponytails, someone one day didn't come up and say, oh, my head hurts because I'm wearing a bun all day. Like, that didn't just happen yesterday, right? This has been a conversation that's probably been around for years. So what these women are saying is absolutely right. Like, these are still the conversations that you think, us being the most modernized and most forward-leaning Air Force that we've possibly been, that we're still struggling to grasp our way around. And yes, there are groups around the Women's Initiative team, which is like an Air Force-wide team that you can jump in on. Men and women can jump in on. Be part of those conversations, right, to kind of push some of these initiatives forward, because like I said, we move way too slow for us to be as modernized and as advanced as we are. So what these women are saying is true. These things have been true since I was a lieutenant, right, like 10 years ago. So it just goes to show you how slow some of these processes take to materialize in the armed services. Sorry.
I can confirm that the ponytail discussion has been going on for literal years.
Now, the frustrating part too is, when I go work with our foreign counterparts and their hair is down and in braids, and I'm like, no, I just like my hair up in this bun, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you all for contributing to that. It really gave me a lot of insight.
Lieutenant Mavridis, did you have anything to add, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, sorry I got kicked out. I keep blaming Edwards is an isolated location, but and I believe the captain talked a little bit about this, but mill to mill, and I've seen it right now. We're going through the summer VML, so the summer vulnerable to move list. So good news, my husband and I are getting stationed together. We're moving to Colorado. But when I was a cadet, he's 2 years ahead of me. He had his job, he had his base, he's like living LT life. And there are only certain jobs that can line up with his job. So I made a conscious effort to like find a job to make sure that we could stay together. For me, that was absolutely what's important. Other people are going to value other things. What I've been told is you value your career, you value being together, and this is specifically for mill to mill, or you value your location. So you can pick two of the three. And my husband and I did distance for 2 years, and I decided I will never do that again. So we made conscious decisions. My career field, FSS, goes everywhere. And it's a blessing that I got FSS. I love it. And it goes everywhere. It can go, he's transferring to the Space Force, so I will be able to go to any base that he goes to. And that's what I value. So if we were to get separated, that would be a huge decision point for the both of us, understanding like what we had to go through for distance, that potentially one of us would get out, transition to the reserves. There's a ton of opportunities elsewhere. But I would say that's definitely one that I've experienced as a mill-to-mill couple is PCSing is definitely what will drive some men or women. I've seen it both ways to get out of the Air Force. So that happens at the lieutenant colonel level too. I'm currently in conversations trying to keep a mill-to-mill couple together. So we are working that right now to make sure that one of them can retire. It's so sad that they're almost at the finish line. And they're going to make the conscious decision to keep their family together, and one person's not going to earn their pension because the Air Force wants to separate them. So we are a service. We did join for a bigger reason. So if the Air Force needs us to do something, we can do it, but at what cost? And for this family, they want to stay together, just like I wanted to stay with my husband. So we're working that for them, but that is definitely a reason that I see maybe not as many women are going to climb those higher echelons.
Thank you very much for that answer. Does anyone have any other questions?
I actually did have a question. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a first year cadet. So I have a lot of friends who are enlisted because I'm from Guam and almost everybody's like in the military, but from my female friends who are enlisted, they have talked to me about being very careful and cautious with dealing with males of like higher rank. And I'm in no way trying to put down males, but dealing with them and being inappropriate. And they were trying to advise me to be careful. Like, do you have any advice on that?
I feel like I touched on it a little bit earlier when I talked about perception. If you don't think it looks good, then try to at least get somebody else in the room or whatever's going on. There's a lot of truth to that, and there's a lot that just I've dealt with personally as a result. But if you could, and it sucks that you have to think about it this way, but just keep perception at the forefront of your mind. So like if a male lieutenant colonel wanted to walk into my office and talk to me, I would have him leave the door open. And if he insists on shutting the door, then I would have somebody else in the room with me just to make sure that I can control that perception of what's going on. Little things like that, whatever you think you're going to need to do to make sure you can control that. That is a thing that unfortunately a lot of us are going to have to deal with, whether you want to or not. I never thought that I would have to face dealing with rumors like that, but I did. So now I just work really hard to control what it looks like to literally anybody. Like, what could you twist this into? What do I need to do to make sure that I always look the most professional and like nothing could go wrong here?
And that's not always easy. I mean, that it's hard and it feels hard. It will be stressful. But that is absolutely the best way, in my opinion, to go about it. So I'd absolutely second everything the captain just said.
Can I jump in on that, Vinant-Tang? Right, sorry.
Go ahead.
So from my perspective, right, accountability. So what these women are speaking from are points of a lot of perspective of them trying to champion their role in navigating this space, right? Like, we shouldn't leave them on this island of, hey, like, you're the woman, this is your situation, you deal with this, right? When it comes to perception, hold yourself accountable and hold your peers accountable. If Cadet Moyle was Lieutenant Moyle and I was his peer, right? And I'm like, hey, like, this might look a little bit off. I'm your peer. I'm just trying to give you this straight up. Like, you might not want to go down this path, or you should be aware that this is a perception that could be out there, right? Hold people accountable, right? Because that's how we lose people in our armed services. And that's how, at least from the perspective that I've seen, right? With younger female enlisted or younger female officers, because someone didn't hold someone else accountable, right? Step up. If you see something and you're like, this could be perceived this way, step up and call them out, right? Like, you don't need to do it in front of everyone, but pull them aside to an office and be like, hey, sir, don't know what this is, but from what it looks like, this is what this is. This is how people might be perceiving it, right? In intelligence, we have a bunch of different intelligence sources. We jokingly say we have rumit, right? Which is rumor intelligence. People are always going to talk before that information ever gets up to you, right? People are always going to say, oh, well, Captain Jones is hanging out with Airman so-and-so a lot. Like, something must be off, right? So people are going to talk. If you catch one of that, talk to the individual, right? On whichever party you feel safe with, or have someone else talk to that individual and just say, hey, this is what might be what's going on for both your safety and for both your awareness, right? Try to figure out a situation that makes both of you more comfortable in having a relationship that isn't going to be perceived negatively on the outside view.
Yes, sir, that's a great point. One of the things that I would do at Kirtland, I was in a flight with 10 other lieutenants, and I put my foot down probably day one, and I said, okay, I don't gossip. Like, it's fun. It can be fun. It can be stress relief, but I don't gossip. So every once in a while, it'd start creeping into the conversation, like, oh, whoa, you know what, gang, that's gossip. We shouldn't be doing that, and we wouldn't like it if they were talking about that way. And so sometimes I'd come off as being, you know, whatever choice word you want to use, but that's what worked for me. And so after about 6 months of that, they kind of figured out, oh, we're not going to talk about this stuff.
Thank you all for your answers.
Did you have anything to add, Lieutenant Mavroudis?
Yeah, I mean, all of the officers had a ton of awesome things to say. The other thing that I would add, and if this has already been shared, I apologize. I've kind of, again, my service. It's really establishing that environment. I mean, this starts from the command down, and then it starts from your airmen up. But establishing the environment that it's not okay. So yes, not gossiping, but letting small, crude jokes slide, like laughing it off uncomfortably, those small things, and nipping those in the bud quickly. I would say that is something that, one, helps us women feel more comfortable and confident when we walk into a room. That I've definitely walked in and it's me and 15, 20 other senior enlisted or commanders, and they could laugh and say crude things, but they don't, because they respect that the rank, and they respect that I'm also a woman, that they would not say crude things. I would hope not in front of me and not behind my back either. That you hold your senior enlisted accountable, you hold your commander accountable, because they're the ones, it's going to start from them. So if they're going to let those things slide, then that's going to slide in other echelons too, in other ranks. And that really, everyone can hold each other accountable. So that's my answer.
Yeah, LT, that is a great point. Because also, if they're okay making crude jokes about, sexual stuff, it's not a far cry to the racial stuff. And that's like, neither is okay, but that's when I get really defensive, especially for my airmen of color, because I don't look it. I'm actually half Asian. My mother's family's from Guam. And that side of the family went through hell to be in this country back in the 60s. So that's one thing that I definitely do not tolerate. So that's another thing that's got to come at the forefront as well.
Thank you very much. Those are some really insightful comments. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question to add on the previous. I wanted to ask if any careers in the Air Force almost avoids this type of social pressure, because idealistically, I would love to just come in and do my job and not worry about this type of stuff. Are there any career fields that kind of avoid the social interaction almost?
Actually, mine kind of does, because if you look at acquisitions, again, I'm the only woman in my entire group. There's only 15 of us in my entire group, but that kind of puts extra pressure on me, because now all eyes are on the only female officer in this entire group. So yes and no, right? But there's no way around it, even when you're not in the military. So there's always going to be that pressure. And there will always be ways for you to find a coping mechanism to help you work through that. And your peers and your leadership should absolutely be behind you for that, but not just the officership. Go to your NCOs, not even your senior NCOs. Just, if you're in a cube area and you have a senior airman or staff sergeant there, and you say, "Hey, Sarge, I need an adult to tell me what's going on with this," and they will help you. They should help you.
I want to highlight.
And I'll add on to that, your first sergeant. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, LT. Go ahead.
Yeah, your first sergeant.
Ma'am, I believe you're muted.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Your first sergeant is amazing. They will take care of you. They know every single resource available to you. And if they don't know they're going to figure it out. They've got a network of first sergeants. I would suggest, at least they've had it at Edwards. It's called the First Sergeant Symposium. It is open to typically those who are looking to be first sergeants, but this is like Lieutenant 101. If you have airmen or if you just care about people, go to the First Sergeant Symposium. You will learn every single resource that is available to anyone on the base. your first sergeant. They're amazing. So that's my plug.
Captain Jones, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Oh no, I thought that was fantastic. My specific comment to Cadet O, and you haven't learned this yet because you haven't gotten to the PFC ranks, right? The Air Force, the military we're society, except we wear uniforms, right? So there's never going to be a workplace, unfortunately and fortunately, that you're not going to have these conversations, right? Even if you go into a workplace and it's all male and you are the only female and no one just ever talks about that situation, sure, which is not great because men should also understand this perspective as well. Your next organization is not going to look like that, right? So it's important to build these steps and use the resources like the LT said, and use the resources like Lieutenant Wuckner said, to get that perspective out and to make sure that environment is inclusive of everyone, because the jokes, whether it is about females, can easily go towards religion, can easily go towards sexual orientation or race, right? So just because they haven't picked a specific demographic to make crude jokes about or to chastise whatever in that situation, doesn't mean that someone else isn't on the dock to be part of the receiving end of that. So if you are nervous of having these conversations, right, you have your first shirt, you have your chaplain team. You don't have to be religious to talk to your chaplain team, right? You have your IG, you have your allies that can help you and navigate these conversations to be a little bit more successful in these environments.
Great, thank you very much. I'll open it up for the next question now.
I can go ahead and ask the next question. Good afternoon, ladies and cadets and Captain Jones. My name is Cadet Isa Raras, and I am a first year in the Air Force ROTC program. My question goes hand in hand with kind of some of the previous questions asked. Do you guys feel like there are any societal pressures to, if you are like either married, single, or possibly even like divorced in the Air Force? Like, what are some of the challenges or resources you can like seek out?
Lieutenant Wuckner had to step out to take a call. So if you could start, Captain Burrow-Westman, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, and then just to make sure I understand the question, you were asking about societal pressures that had to do with your demographics. Were you wanting resources for those?
You can talk about any of like the pressures, so like the challenges, or in general, if you just want to talk about the resources, or either, you can just kind of feel free to like share whatever you want to with this.
Okay, I would argue that the same societal pressures that you're going to encounter outside of the Air Force, you're going to encounter here too. Because yeah, our demographics are kind of skewed a little bit, and that's just a systemic thing that's been going on because the Air Force started as all male and then we get women in. So, but you're still going to deal with everything just as you would on the outside. What I found as far as resource-wise is actually Facebook has a lot of groups, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug the group that we always say never exists, but it's there. It's the U.S. Air Force Women Officers Forum. Yes, you have to be a woman officer to join. No, we're not going to waive that. But there are many, many, many subgroups when it comes to that. The one that I admin is for single and or child-free women officers. There's also a moms group where they'll talk about some of the challenges that are unique to trying to be a mom and juggle your career no matter what status you are. We've also got a Guard and Reserve group. Oftentimes we just need to ask how to do something because there's lots of little reservisms that not always are fully understood by active duty counterparts. But basically, if you need a group that understands what you're going through, or you're just looking for that demographic support, then there's probably a Facebook group for it. And these are not officially sanctioned by the Air Force, but they're run by a bunch of women officers that saw the need and decided to fill the need and be there as a support network for each other.
I can vouch for these groups. They are awesome. Whether it's just a funny meme that we just need to let you know, lighten the mood, or some serious questions. It's a very encouraging group. And honestly, these women don't tolerate negativity. The group is super, super uplifting. It's always positive vibes because sometimes you just need that. So.
Lieutenant Wickner, did you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
So I'm sorry, I came in a little late for my phone call. So it sounds like you're looking at support resources a little bit. One thing that really helped me is joining the Federal Asian Pacific American Council. So it's nationally recognized. They have a brand new DoD chapter, but it's open to all federal employees, retirees, students. There's a membership fee for it, but the leadership courses you get out of it and the contacts you make, and even the volunteer experience that goes along with it is so valuable. It gives me a different way to work with other people on base that in my job I wouldn't ordinarily interact with. There's a lot of women in it. It's really pretty cool. But we can talk a little more freely about all those concerns that we're not supposed to talk about, or historically we weren't supposed to talk about. Things like race, things like religious differences in the workplace. It gives us that outlet to be able to kind of hash through things with the understanding that we're all professional people spread across, the United States, and we're not just there for Department of Defense or the Air Force, but we're there as fellow people concerned for fostering that diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And for me, like I would never have been able to do this in the private sector. So I find that just as empowering as a lot of actual Air Force resources too. So FAPAC, I'm sure there are other resources for other different groups. And I would really highly encourage you to get involved with those as well.
Thank you. All right, we'll open up to the next question.
I have a question. Good afternoon, ladies, Captain Jones, and cadets. I'm Cadet Richlick. I'm a second year at UCLA. So sorry if these questions have already been asked since I had to go to class. I'm a little late, but when I watched the Honorable Vice President Kamala Harris take her oath, I felt like the glass ceiling was quivering. Has there been a moment in your career in the Air Force that made you feel like the glass ceiling is starting to break, or any personal stories that made you feel proud to be a woman in the Air Force?
I think for me, it was being stationed at Kirtland, and kind of overnight, we had a female commander, a female DO, a female security advisor, who was essentially the security manager for the building, and a female technical director. It was like a unicorn squadron. You never get those things. So that felt pretty good, just to have somebody in the front office that understand, hey, maybe I don't feel so hot today, and it's nothing that anybody around me can do. As petty as that sounds.
That is a really good question that I honestly would probably have to reflect on a little bit more. It's pretty cool. I'm like the first female exec in the last 10 years. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, that's all I got. So I'm going to reflect on that one, but I'll really have to think about that.
And then I think I was having an audio problem for a second there. Can I get the question one more time?
Yes, ma'am. I was reflecting on watching Honorable Vice President Kamala Harris take her oath in office on the 20th, and I felt like the glass ceiling was quivering. My question was, has there been a moment in your career in the Air Force that made you feel like the glass ceilings are starting to break, or any personal stories that made you feel proud to be an Air Force woman in the Air Force?
Yes. Okay, I got this. So my last deployment, I went as an air advisor. And I remember one of the things that my husband was concerned about was that I was going to Iraq and I was a female. And I'm like, well, obviously they don't care about that because they did not put that restriction on the billet. And then as an air advisor specifically to where I was, what that meant was that I was going to the Iraqi intelligence school and I was going to be teaching intel concepts to the Iraqi officers, specifically to their instructors. It was part of a train the trainer program. So I teach their teachers how to teach their students. And it was all concepts, like we didn't even, I don't know, I think if I had to use a border as like a visual, then I used Florida and Georgia just because they were next to each other and it was not over there. So I got to spend 6 months with these guys and the progress of like where we started. So culturally learning, they learn by rote memorization. They will sit down at a desk and they will write down every word that I say. They will try to memorize it and parrot it back to me on a test, but I wasn't giving tests. So I was just kind of like, no, we're going to think a little more analytically, I think. So my final class that I got to teach right before I left was also kind of the capstone class, just culminating everything that I had been working toward for the past 6 months. And I had PA following me around that day. So, you know, no stress at all. I just really want these guys to have learned something from me. And 2 things happened. Everybody's minds were immediately put at ease because they don't care that I'm a female. They did not care that I was a female walking in trying to teach them something. Absolutely nobody was emasculated by that fact. What they saw was that I walked in wearing this tape that said United States Air Force and this Velcro that said captain. And as far as they're concerned, the US government thinks that I am good enough at my job to be a captain, and that is what they respected. Still didn't shake my hand. I'm not there to shake hands, I'm there to teach classes. But the very last class, I was so excited to see what happened that when PA was trying to interview me about it later, they actually had to put down their pen and turn on a recorder because I was talking so fast. But basically I gave them, I had one of the soldiers I was working with create like 5 mock intelligent reports. I said, give me 2 humans, a SIGINT and a GEOINT, and just make it look like equipment is being gathered at a border, like in an open field near a border of somewhere. And basically I gave these 5 pieces of intelligence reports to my students and I said, tell me what's going on. And one of the students actually like raised his hand and he flagged me down and he's like, so it could be a number of things. It could be this is getting ready to happen, but also because of historical evidence, it could be this other thing. And I'm like, you're doing the analysis. Like, you're not just saying, oh, it has to be this because XYZ. Like, this is not math. This is something completely different. And I was just so excited to see that these guys completely put aside the fact that I was female. What they knew was that I had something that they could learn. And then by the end of the 6-month effort that I've been working with them on, they came back to me and they did it perfectly. I'm like, hey, we're talking about COAs. What's the most likely thing going to happen? And he tells me, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And so for them, it was a big breakthrough because the way that they see their mark of like progression is if they pass the test, like what percentage did they get on the test? So it was kind of frustrating for them to not have a test, but when they saw like how excited I was that they were coming up with all I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't have answers. I wanted them to tell me what they thought the answer could be, honestly. So it was a great moment. It was a great ending to my 6 months of effort that started with, oh my goodness, I'm nervous because I'm a female trying to teach Iraqi soldiers something I don't think I'm going to be respected, until they wanted to take pictures with me at the end. And there was a major in the class that actually, he knew I was a captain and he knew the equivalents to his rank. And on the last day of class, he brought in his old captain's boards, rank boards, and gifted them to me. So I propped them on my shoulder for like pictures. So that was awesome. Awesome relationships built, awesome progress made. And these guys, those are their instructors, and they're going to be able to take that and teach those concepts to their students. So that's one of my proudest moments in my career so far.
Man, that's actually like a really cool story. But have you had any experiences where it wasn't that accepting? Because I know, a lot of people you might work with wouldn't be as accepting of a woman officer, right? It's just not in their culture. So.
Yeah, not culturally. That has happened in America a few times. Literally as a second lieutenant, I was an acquisitions officer, but I was coded as a scientist. I walked into the engineering hangar where I was supposed to work, and the chief engineer did not like the fact that I was out there because I'm distracting to his engineers. And comments were made to the effect of that I needed a gender appropriate position, or I don't belong out there because I didn't have the right degree, or because I wasn't an electrical engineer. Everybody else said there was electrical engineers and I'm a scientist. So that, I mean, I've had that multiple times in my career where it's like, oh, she's just a female. What does she actually know? But yeah, those resources are out there. If you can't get traction with people that are treating you that way, those resources are out there. In this case, that resource was the EO office. And ultimately, the outcome of that wasn't ideal for I think it wasn't ideal for what I wanted, but it was ideal for me. I was actually put in a different work setting where I was given the opportunity to thrive. So yeah, if something's wrong, say something, take notes, write your memo for record, and then definitely say something. The resources are out there and we're getting better at listening to that.
Before we move on to the next question, could you clarify what an EO office is?
Equal opportunity. So a lot of times people say, go talk to the IG, go talk to the IG. Yeah, sure, you can always talk to the IG, but depending on what your issue is, there might actually be a difference between, you don't necessarily want the IG, you might need to talk to equal opportunity. And then, so do a little bit of research on that, especially if you think that you're gonna want to have like a restricted or protected communication. I learned a lot about it because my husband's the wing IG at Edwards right now. So, but yeah, so for me, because it was gender discrimination, it was actually equal opportunity.
Is your husband Colonel Westman?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, small world. Okay.
Yeah, see, the Air Force is very small. Don't forget that, guys. You saw what just happened.
Well, thank you very much. We can open it up to the next question now.
I have a question, and I don't know if it's a good question as it is. First off, my name is Cadet Vinant-Tang. I'm a third-year cadet and student at UCLA, and my major is chemistry. So my question is, have you noticed any cultural change in the Air Force since you started serving till now?
I can start with this one. So a little bit of my background. Okay, I'm biracial. I come from a unit that would let me do a lot of other educational things. So I got invested in the local community in Albuquerque. And this last summer, especially with the George Floyd protests, you know, there were heavy protests in Albuquerque. There's some people that died. And the Air Force made the announcement, hey, you're going to start having these hard talks with your airmen. In the past, you've never been able to talk about, you know, all these cultural differences before, but you have to now, and good luck. So I went to my commander's office. She was a brand new commander. So she's a lieutenant colonel. She's been in the job for essentially 7 days. And now she's faced with this entire, okay, go do this thing that we've never done before. By the way, you know, come up with your own resources because there's no funds to be able just to do this stuff. And I was able to rely heavily on our local community, but just the act of having these difficult conversations on a work day, we went off site, it was civilian attire. It was a moderated discussion with local anti-racism organizations. That has never happened in my Air Force. And I say my Air Force because my dad was Air Force, my grandfather was Air Force. My grandfather was 24 years as a Pacific Islander coming into the Air Force in 1954. Try not to get emotional. We were only allowed to do food service. We were not good enough to be anything but food service. And it took civil rights legislation in the 60s to change that, and for Pacific Islanders to actually be US citizens at birth. And then my dad's Air Force was still, we don't need or want women firefighters. Why do we need women pilots? We don't need that stuff. It's just harder. So just being able to put on this uniform every day, and oh, by the way, go have these difficult conversations now, it is vastly different, even in just the last 3 years. So I think it's moving in a good direction. And as long as we're fostering an environment where we can take time to talk about these things that mean different things to all of us, but still mean something to all of us, is the biggest change.
Stuff like that is great to hear, by the way. I think that there's a lot to be said for generational turnover. Right before Christmas, my stepdad actually came down to visit me here because I live close to family again. And my commander was really cool. She let him hang out at our staff meeting because he was in town. And he was looking around the room and startled at, the sheer number of women, but also he was asking me about like the individual people that I work with. And I made reference to one of the other female members and her wife and something that they do together. And he looked at me and he's just like, that is amazing. When I was in, they would have gotten kicked out for that. Like, that's awesome that they're here. Because of course, just prior to that, I had also said how this person is a rock star troop and I absolutely love that I get to work with her. So he's happy that there have been changes, like positive changes in the right direction, and that we're not just kicking someone out of the service because of who they are or whatever background, something like that. We're actually doing better at maintaining those skills and the good people that you want. So yeah, I feel like overall, I can't really speak to like the whole Air Force, but I can speak to my experience in just over the past 10 years. It's gotten a lot better, a lot easier just to be able to have those conversations, and not just because they're mandated, but because they matter to people and the leaders are starting to care more.
I couldn't agree more. You honestly took the words out of my mouth. The leaders care, and from the highest ranks down, they want to listen. So I know here at Edwards, we have what's called hard talks every single week. The wing commander, who, let me vouch for him, is probably one of the busiest men on this base. He sets aside time to speak to anyone who wants to come, and he'll just talk about any topic. He wants to know the challenges that you are facing. It doesn't matter what challenge, he just wants to know. He wants to know how he can make it better. And I think that's super, super valuable for someone of his rank and of his busy schedule to take out as much time. We don't schedule anything after 3 o'clock on Thursdays because he's been there 6, 7 o'clock at night because people want to talk to him. And it's awesome too, because we have a 2-star on our base as well. And he'll go down there, he'll pop in, and he was there last night till 6 o'clock talking to people because they had things that they wanted. They had things that they wanted to bring tangible, change to our base. And leaders are listening. And if you're finding a leader that is not listening, find their counterpart. Explain to them why it's important to, if it's important to their subordinate, it should be important to them. So it might need to be phrased differently, but people are willing to listen and get on board.
Thank you.
Wow, very thought-provoking conversation. We'll open it up to any last questions before we move on to the final question. Any GMC have any questions? All right then. So just a last question to kind of conclude. I wanted to collect a few, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, a few like leadership book examples that you had. Any recommendations of that sort? And then after that, if you wanted to, I don't know if any cadets wanted to get information to talk a bit more. Some cadets were interested in hearing more about your biographies. So that stuff can happen afterwards. So just any leadership book recommendations or any other of that vein that you want to give to us?
Oh, okay. Since I quoted one earlier, I'll start. I'm currently going through Extreme Ownership by Jocko Wilkins, I believe. I don't butcher his last name. He also has a podcast called the Jocko Podcast. He's awesome. He's a Navy SEAL. He developed actually the Navy SEAL leadership curriculum. And then now he is kind of an entrepreneur and teaches a bunch of CEOs how to be good leaders. This book is awesome. Like, you can't put it down. This book is great. Another one that I read, it's a super quick read, Wolfpack by Abby Wambach. She's not like typically known for her leadership books. However, to be a team captain on the women's national soccer team, you've got to have some sort of leadership. So she takes a lot of her lessons from the field and kind of converts that to being leaders. She personally writes it as a woman. So a lot of the, I guess, pronouns are going to be she, but it can be applied to airmen. It could be he, it could be anything you want. So I would read that one with a little bit more of an open mind, because she does primarily talk to women. But those are my two favorite right now. Stand Out is another one. I do not know who the author is, but that is a good one. It's gathering your confidence and how to portray yourself as a leader. So that's less leadership tactic, or less like leadership principles and more like tactics. So when you walk into a room, like the way you position your head, like that's like very more like a tactical book. That one's Stand Out. Those are my three right now.
Thank you very much. Did you have anything to add, Captain Burr-Westman?
Yeah, so just moved into my house. This is my bookshelf. It's still empty because my books are in boxes. But I promise I have like 30 boxes of books, and I'm trying to remember like what the names of them are. However, when it comes to my book selection, when it like trying to improve my leadership skills, I actually lean more toward the psychology type stuff. So she did mention 5 love languages, just knowing what the best way to talk to somebody is, like their motivation. That's super helpful. Emotional intelligence books, I picture it in my mind, the cover's purple. I'm sorry, I can't remember what it's called, but it's emotional intelligence. And then honestly, most of the books that I read come from like the US Army Interrogators Course book list. So you can probably Google that. But it's learning a lot about people and the best way to communicate with them, because it's not necessarily like knowing how to get information out of someone, sure, whatever, but to get to that point required a lot of communication skills on your part. And that's kind of what I want to go for, is I can't harp on it if I'm not trying to better myself at it. And then every year I always scan the CSAF list, the reading list. And once you go active duty, check out Air University at Maxwell Air Force Base. They ship for free. So reach out, let them know what you want, and they'll get you copies of it.
Thank you very much. Could you repeat the name of that book list, ma'am?
The US Army Interrogators Course.
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am. Did you...
It was the most random thing. I did not mean, like, I didn't go out looking for interrogator books. One of my detachment cadre at a training school that I went to once, he was like a former interrogator instructor, and he knew that I was trying to get smart on emotional intelligence, like a better way to communicate, because I was in the middle of cross training to a different career field, and I knew I was going to deal with a wider array of people. And he said, actually, I think you might enjoy some of the books on this book list, because a lot of them are very heavy on communication and figuring out what makes people tick.
Great, thank you very much. Did you have anything to add, Lieutenant Wickner?
Oh, I'm terrible. I'm working on a doctorate in international relations right now, so I'm not reading leadership books, but honestly, this has been on my bookshelf for the last, it's 2021, since 2012, this has been on my bookshelf perpetually. And what is that? That is Understanding International Relations. Obviously, it's an old edition. It is well loved and well highlighted. And I always refer back to that for a bunch of different stuff. And then because I'm always learning languages, if you know anybody who speaks Vietnamese, I'm looking for a language partner. So sorry, I don't have leadership books, just everything else.
Thank you very much, ma'am. All right, well, if anyone...
I have one more.
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Anything Simon Sinek is awesome. Simon Sinek, he's great. Leaders Eat Last, that's a great one. Start with Why, that's another great one.
Sorry, might I recognize listening to Simon Sinek as like a podcast? I've tried really hard to read all of his books. and he writes the way he speaks, which is not a bad thing, but also it's just so fun to watch him actually present his information.
True, absolutely true. And then another, and this is not a book, but our chief of staff came out with, it's like a 12-pager. It's called Accelerate, Change, or Lose. It came out in July of 2020. So by the time some of y'all commission, he's still going to be our chief of staff. So I would read that, and it's super concise, and it really talks about like the airmen we need. So it's Accelerate, Change, or Lose. And it's a very well concise, basically where our Air Force is going as airmen. So I think that'd be super beneficial as new lieutenants to kind of understand what our chief of staff would like, because that trickles down. That's where our MAJCON commanders, our wing commanders, our squadron commanders are all looking at this document, and they're morphing their goals based on this document. So accelerate, change, or lose.
Thank you very much. Well, if anyone has any last questions, feel free to ask them. But at this point, if any of the panelists need to go, you're more than welcome to. Additionally, some cadets asked me, some of them that could not come were asking if they could maybe get more information on like your biography, your experiences afterwards. If that would be better sent in an email or something like that. If you'd be more willing to send that to me, I'll ask for an RFI. I'll send an RFI out for that.
And before we head out of here today,
sure.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, LT.
Sorry, no, all you.
I was just going to say my final remarks, so go ahead.
I was just going to say I'll send you an email. That's all.
Awesome. Yeah, Cadet Vinant-Tang, I'm just going to steal your final minute. Just keep being a good patron of people's time. So once again, right, like thank you and your team for this fantastic panel. For you ladies, this is our inaugural panel, a new initiative that we're starting from. So you all are like our case study of if we can do something like this. So Cadet Vinant-Tang, again, you and your team did a fantastic job. For those of you that are still here and those of you that had to leave, right, like this is fantastic conversation, right? These are three perspectives of our Air Force, and these are part of the perspectives you're going to receive as you move throughout your ROTC and Air Force career, right? The biggest thing that I want you all to take away from this is listen to these perspectives, because these are going to be people and perspectives that you're going to lead, that you're going to be supervised by, that are going to be your peers, right? And these are, more importantly, what one of the ladies said earlier, these are humans. These are people that you should care about. So make sure to take the time to understand different people's perspectives, their backgrounds, and understand how you fit into that narrative to help make them successful as they navigate the Air Force. So again, Cadet Vinant-Tang, I'll pass it back to you. But ladies, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here. And LT Malvrotis, tell Chief Aishan I say hello.
Oh my goodness, I will.
Well, on that note, you're all free to go. I have nothing else for you, so more than welcome to disperse as you like.
Thank you.